Live your life, boy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
Yeah, rear naked choke a cocker spaniel, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Bro.
Change the neighborhood up.
Conspiracy Farm. Go. Check it out.
And here we are, ladies and gentlemen, locked and loaded for another episode of the Conspiracy Farm. We appreciate your patience, ladies and gentlemen. We took kind of a little bit of a break. I did anyway, because my brain just wasn't quite working right. The world's on fire, and I was just trying to get my thoughts together. And we have scored an absolutely incredible guest today. So very excited, even a little nervous. But before we get started, ladies and gentlemen, support the farm, support the sponsors, theconspiracyfarm.com. If you're not a fan of the interweb, you can go, and if you happen to have Dish Channel, Dish Network, go to Dish Community, search for the Conspiracy Farm, and you can find our very, very extremely handsome mugs there. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce my sidekick, who I roll with all the time, UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich. How are we doing this evening, champion?
You know, I'm doing wonderful, Jeff. And when I looked at my, we're just going to talk real quick. When I looked at my Twitter account and noticed that our guest suddenly was following me on Twitter, I said, that can't be the real man himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sent a message and said, is this the real person? And I got a response back, yes. And I said, holy cow, what can I do to get you on my podcast? We've got a pretty substantial listenership. And it was just, email my assistant. So that's where that picked up at. And my story, as our listeners know, started at 5 or 6 years old in 1971, 72, right in there. Collapse happened. The farmers were all rushing the banks, and I was standing in line at 4 or 5 a.m. with my grandma and my mom in Albia, Iowa, at the Farmers National Bank after Nixon took us off the gold standard, and my brain was opened up to the world that, it just happened. And I was the kid that was paying attention on the living room floor, watching Walter Cronkite and starting to try and figure things out. But when I read this man's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, that's when it all came together for me. And I want to thank this man for literally educating me and millions of people. I wish every high schooler in America had to read this book. I'd love for that to be the case, because we would not be in the predicament we are in today if they did. So go ahead, Jeff. You can introduce.
Well, and this gentleman could easily been spending the several months taking victory laps after victory lap, because his analysis has been so prescient from so far back in the day. He is the author, like you said, champ, of Creature from Jekyll Island, as well as A World Without Cancer, an incredible documentary, The Capitalist Conspiracy. Among many other things, his contribution has been very substantial and significant. G. Edward Griffin is joining us today. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm very well, thank you. And my ego is all puffed out listening to that introduction. Thank you. You're very kind.
As it should be.
As it should be. Well, there's so much to unpackage here, and I know we don't have so much time, because we could easily just spend forever talking about, the Creature from Jekyll Island, your analysis. But I want to kind of have a story arc here, because again, your analysis has been so prescient. Some of the interviews you've had with individuals like Yuri Bezmenov, and you transpose that to where we are today. It just makes your analysis even more prescient, sir. You're doing good though, right? Hanging out there and enjoying life?
Well, yeah, doing both of the above. Enjoying life a lot when I stop and think about all the good things that we still have. And we better be sure to do that, because when you look at that blue sky and those white clouds, not the chemtrails, but the real white clouds that go drifting by, and you think, oh, it's a great planet to be on. And then you think about all those fruitcakes that are taking over the thing and reckoning it. You got to, okay, enough of the nature. Let's get back to work and see if we can't recapture the system.
Yeah, and I think that is very important in these times, man. Is like I said, we literally took about 2 weeks off. It's doing this kind of work. It's exhausting. Again, I don't have to tell you, but we tumbled down that rabbit hole a lot, and it's very kind of draining. So I definitely, again, appreciate our patience of our farmers. Appreciate you for coming on. And I always like to ask people, especially someone who's gone back as far as you have, when did that bug bite you? Like Pat just said, the bug bit him standing in the bank and the lines of the banks in Albion, Iowa. Me as a 16, 15-year-old kid, the assassination of JFK and realizing what really happened really blew my mind. When did that happen with you? When did the bug bite you, sir?
Well, the bug bit me the first time that I remember being bit by it. It was in 1960. That's a long time ago. I was a young guy. I was working for a large insurance company. I had a lot of corporations in my account portfolio, people who were insured with our company. I worked for the Equitable Life Assurance Society of the United States, big long title. I think it's the third largest company in the United States, headquartered in New York. So I was climbing the corporate ladder. I was trying to look good, trying to make money, had myself the beautiful wife, had the house in the suburbs. I had the kids, and the dog in the car, had all the things, and I wanted more. I really wasn't the kind of a person that I am today. I was just like, I guess, everybody else. I was programmed pretty much by my environment. I was raised, fortunately, by a very wise lady. I came from a broken home, but I was fortunate to be taken in by my aunt, who was a school teacher, and she taught me a lot of very good things and good values. And she was an English teacher, so I learned something about English against my will. I didn't really want to study very much. Anyway, I had a good break in my life. I got out of a bad environment at probably about the age of, 12 to 14, I've forgotten. And from that point forward, I really consider myself to be fortunate because I was introduced to a lot of positive and constructive role models. I saw life from a perspective of creativity and kindness and generosity and all that kind of thing, which stood me, I suppose, in good stead, because later I got into this corporate ladder business. And then one day I ran into some information about the United Nations, of all things. And of course, remember in 1960, I had come out of the University of Michigan. I was totally indoctrinated, like everybody else, that the United Nations was our last best hope for peace, And they do so much good. They were inoculating all these poor children in Africa, preventing them from having these dread diseases, I thought. Oh boy, was I wrong on that. But anyway, I thought it was so good. And so when I saw this adverse information about the UN, I thought, that's poppycock. But it aroused my curiosity. And one day I had some spare time downtown Los Angeles. There's a big, beautiful library down there. And for the first time since leaving the university, I voluntarily walked into a library. I thought that was weird because in school, I thought, reading books was something you did for penance, for doing something wrong when you were a bad boy. And I never wanted to read a book again. But anyway, this was the beginning. Now, you talk about the bite. So I got hold of this little book, and and with this little pamphlet, somebody gave it to me, and it challenged the popular view of the UN. So I went to the library to debunk it. It was not typical for me to do that, but I did. When I got to the library, I got all these books about the United Nations, and I thought it was strange that they were all written by people who were either on the payroll of the UN or the United Nations Association or the State Department. All of these people seemed to have the same point of view, which even then I realized was not really central focused on American principles or American goals. It was like internationalism, which sounded good to me. Internationalism, what's wrong with that, But I did sense that there was something about it. And I thought it was weird that there was nothing critical about the UN then, because I was expecting to see some data about this information that I had run across. Anyway, I'm taking too long. I began to do some independent research just out of curiosity. And it didn't take very long, gentlemen, as you probably can guess, before I realized that there was a lot of valid and scholarly information available, but it wasn't in the library. It was outside of the official sources of information. It wasn't in the school textbooks. It wasn't in the newspapers. It wasn't on television, but it was there. It was there if you wanted to go to the back rooms of the library and go through the microfilm and do your own really hard research. You could find that the criticisms of the UN that I was reading were valid. And that struck me very hard. And I didn't realize it, but at that time, I discovered I had what you might call a crusader gene. I never really thought much about anything beyond myself and my immediate family and, what's going on here. And all of a sudden, I found myself thinking, what's going to happen to the future of the country? What about the future of the world? I mean, if these things are true, we're being lied to, and we're going down the wrong path. And all these dreams I had in my mind about living the life, being a vice president for a large corporation or something, having a limousine, looking good, having lots of money, all of that was not going to happen. And even if it did happen, it would be accompanied by so much garbage and pain and suffering. And I found myself actually being concerned about things outside myself. Okay, to make a long story short, that was my first bite. That's my first, when the bug bit me, to take an interest in something outside of myself. And from that point forward, it was all downhill. I mean, I just kept finding new material and new areas in which I was being fooled. So finally, to bring the story to a close, I quit my job. And can you imagine, here I'm doing pretty well in the corporation for a young guy. I had it figured out that, in fact, I stalked the company. I realized that all the top executives were really old guys. I mean, they were getting ready to retire. And I looked at the middle management. There weren't too many people in the middle management that were young, and they were all old too. And they had to go all the way down to the bottom before you found the young guys. I thought, well, that's me. So I get in there and do a good job, and then it wouldn't be long before all these old guys retire, and there'd be a vacuum, and whoosh, even if you're not doing too good, you got to move to the top. I had this all figured out. Well, anyway, all of that was behind me. It didn't make any difference. I gave it up. I quit my job. And my poor wife, she almost had kittens. I mean, she said, what are you doing? How are we going to pay for the, da-da-da. But she was a good woman. She stuck with me, and she saw my vision. And so I went into business. I got into the Patriot movement. I started producing little low-budget documentary films. And then I formed Freedom Force International. Then I formed Red Pill Expo and Red Pill University, and earned a lot of notoriety along the way, and here I am. That's it.
It's incredible. That's something. Your book, as I mentioned again, The Creature from Jekyll Island. After reading that book, opened up my mind so much to understanding monetary systems, monetary policy, that foreigners were in control of our politicians, therefore in control of our policies of our nation. It was just a slow grind that they were imposing upon us. And I even had the honor to introduce Rand Paul in 2016 at one of his presidential stops here in Iowa. And, that's something that I talked about, because obviously Ron and Rand Paul are very strong about getting rid of the Federal Reserve. And I talked about that. And there were so many young college students in that crowd also, but they all just looked at each other confused, like, wow, we had no clue. So, the army of people that you have educated are able to go out and hopefully duplicate you and spread the word more and more. So you're the snowball that started all of it, and you have to be. I'm very thankful that you've done what you have.
Well, thank you.
And just for people who may not know completely the full context of the Federal Reserve, Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913, which pretty much gave pretty much power of our financial system, which technically constitutionally is supposed to be only the Congress has the power of printing money and determining the value thereof. But now you enter in 1913 this Federal Reserve, which isn't even federal. It's foreign banks that are now in control of our financial system.
Well, yeah, there's so many red pills to be taken in this story. You don't know where to begin.
Yeah,
You're quite
exactly
right. The Constitution of the United States, if anybody cares anymore, it makes it very clear that Congress has the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. But it's also very clear that what it cannot do, it cannot base the money on credit, on loans. It has to be based on species, gold coins or silver coins. That's all in the Constitution, believe it or not. Well, who reads the Constitution? We know Congress doesn't. We know the Senate doesn't. And heck, we know the Supreme Court doesn't. So this issue of obvious unconstitutionality it has never been challenged because nobody wants to challenge it. There's no way you could defend it, so they won't challenge it. So not only did we give away, or say we, not only did the nation, not only did Congress give away the sovereign right to issue the nation's money, they gave it away to the private banking cartel, which is what the Federal Reserve System is. It is a cartel. So they gave that to a private cartel, but not only that, they let the cartel do that which they themselves could not do. Congress cannot issue money based on loans or debt or credit, but they gave the power to the Federal Reserve, and then they are issuing money based on loans and credit. So it's a double whammy, and no matter how you look at it, it's totally fraudulent, and it leads to more than fraud. It leads to legalized plunder of the American people.
Without a doubt.
Go ahead, book also, sorry, Jeff, that book also prompted me to start writing a book years back. And I had contacted you once, and I think I was too nervous about even talking to you about it. But I had started a book based on special forces, a contracting company similar to Blackwater, to where they were taking tier 1 operators, time travel, and the history of banking, and send these guys back in time to change the path that we are currently on. And I had the whole thing almost completely done. I didn't have the ending of the book written, and my iPad completely crashed and I lost the whole thing. So I went, oh my goodness. And this thing, but it could be a hell of a movie. I know it could be a hell of a movie, and I'd love to have you in that.
Yeah. It'd be great if we could do time travel and go back and do some things right.
Yeah, right.
That we're not done right.
Yeah.
And let's talk about that train trip in 1910 down to Jekyll Island, from up in the Northeast. Just briefly go over that and who was assembled and who was there to write the Federal Reserve Act, and then how it got passed when most politicians in D.C. were home with their families for Christmas break.
Well, the train trip was in 1910.
Yes.
And the passing of the Federal Reserve Act was in 1913.
Yes, sir.
So the train trip wasn't at Christmas. Well, actually, it was, as I recall, it was near Thanksgiving. It was in November. And, of course, there was nothing going on in Congress about the Federal Reserve at that time. But here's what happened. The banks in the United States, prior to the Federal Reserve, were pretty much independent of each other in terms of state laws. The overriding rules and regulations for all the banks, the highest level of political authority, was individual states. The federal government didn't really have an awful lot to do with banking at that time. Well, what happened is that almost all, I'll say almost because that's always safer, but I can't think of any exceptions. So probably all of the banking systems of all of the states really practiced what you might call unethical banking. By that, I mean that they would issue loans based on more money than they had on deposit. And especially since when they took money on deposit from individuals like you and I want to say, well, we got some extra money, we want to put it in the bank where it's safe, and maybe you can pay us a little bit of interest on it. But we would even go without interest as long as you can guarantee that you can safeguard our money so nobody steals it from us, put it in the vault. And they would say, yeah. And they would call that not a time deposit, but they would call it a demand deposit. And that's what we have mostly today. When you go to the bank, if you look at the fine print in your little book, it says this is a demand deposit, or at least it used to. So the idea was that it was your money, it was in the bank, it was safely there, and you could demand it anytime you wanted to, no questions. Well, that was fine until too many people demanded it at the same time. And when more than about 7 or 8% of all the depositors wanted their money at the same time, then all of a sudden the scam was exposed because the money wasn't there. The money was being put out, it was loaned and so forth, which is okay. I mean, nothing is wrong with taking somebody's money and investing it for a mutual profit, as long as they know that's what you're doing. Now, if you tell them, no, it's on safe deposit and you can take it anytime you want to, and then you do that without telling them, this is a problem. And that's what happened in all of the states. The people suddenly got wind of the fact that there wasn't enough money in the vaults to satisfy their deposits if they wanted them. So they started to withdraw their money. Well, after the first 5 or 6% did that, then there were big long lines outside the bank because the bank, first of all, slowed down the process. They'd say, okay, to the tellers, they'd all slow down, check records, go look at things. And we got a little money left, we'll meter it out, but don't rush, And so the lines were very, very, very long. And then finally they ran out of money completely and they had to close their doors. Now, this is what they call that's when the bank holiday comes along, and FDR announced the bank holiday, the closing of all the banks. And it was to protect the banks because they were bankrupt. They could not meet their deposit demands. A lot of banks went out of business. People lost their savings completely, and it was a terrible mess. And so there was a demand on the part of the American people for banking reform. They wanted their congressmen to pass legislation that would prevent that kind of shenanigans from happening again. They wanted to know that their banks were secure and that they were really, reputable and honest institutions, and they weren't going to steal their money. And so it was a win. We're going to have legislation, and we're going to control those big bad banks. So what happened? Do you suppose the banks sat around and said, gosh, fellas, looks like they're going to pass a law and put us into a straitjacket so we can't do all of our tricks anymore? What are we going to do about this? Are we going to sit here and wait and see what happens? No, these fellas are too smart for that. They said, I'll tell you what, we'll go get at the head of the parade. If they want banking reform, good. We'll be the champions of banking reform. We'll get at the head of the parade, and we will demand banking reform. And we will write the bill to reform banking so it suits our purposes. But we mustn't tell anybody that we wrote the bill. And that's why the secret meeting took place on Jekyll Island, away from Washington, D.C. So that train trip that you're talking about represented the leaders of the 6 major banking consortia in the United States. And as you mentioned, some of them had strong connections with overseas banks, particularly the Warburg banks and the Rothschild banks, which is a big conglomerate, of course. You've got practically the whole world there. Of course, then on the U.S. side, you had the Rockefellers and the Morgans and so forth. So these were the big banking interests in the world, and especially in the United States. And they sent their emissaries on this train trip, the private car of Senator Nelson Aldrich. He was the chairman of the committee that was going to draft this legislation. And so he's at sort of the ringleader of rounding up the bankers. And they went to this secret meeting on Jekyll Island. Told nobody knew where they were going. They lied about it. If anybody questioned them, they said, no, we just went on a duck hunting trip or something like that. And for a long time, they denied that the meeting even took place. But the point is, it did take place, and they were there for a week. And the records now are very clear. I got a lot of records from the museum there at Jekyll Island itself. And of course, after the Federal Reserve was created, most of these guys opened up, and they admitted, yes, of course we went, but we couldn't tell anybody what we were doing for obvious reasons, and they bragged about it. And they gave interviews to newspaper reporters, and several of them wrote books, and many of them had their biographers later write about this period of history. So you go to all of these sources, which are in the public domain, but you're not going to find them in the textbooks, But if you go to these public sources and draw all this information together, you get a clear picture of the fact that these guys went in there and they wrote their own reform bill, and it turned out to be a cartel agreement. It was the guy said, look, we're not going to compete anymore. We're going to cooperate. We're going to regulate our industry, and we're going to control the competition. We'll make sure no newcomers come in. We want to dominate the market, and we'll make it look like we're being regulated by Congress, but in fact, we will regulate Congress. That is how it all turned out. So they drafted the bill, they took it to Washington, D.C., and instead of writing at the top of it the Federal Reserve, instead of writing cartel agreement, they wrote Federal Reserve Act.
Right.
And that's how it all came to be. And that's the story behind Jekyll Island.
Well, and it's interesting because I say all the time on this show, everything we're seeing is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the WWE, sir, or WWF, professional wrestling, basically. It's all wrestling. You know what I mean? You have the CEO of this company, Vince McMahon, that pays a Hulk Hogan and then an Andre the Giant to fight to create this false drama, and then we all lose our mind. And then you extrapolate that to a larger geopolitical application. That's exactly what's happening. You have talk to me about individuals like Colonel Edward Mandell House, who basically picked the first governors of the Federal Reserve Board, and even wrote a book what was it called? Philip Drew, Administrator, where it's a fictionalized novel, but he writes about a small group of insiders creating financial crisis to weaken the country, to create civil war. That's kind of fast forward to where we are now. But you look at things like 1907, Trotsky was financed by British banks, and then Lord Alfred Milner in 1917 through his financial organizations helped fund the Bolshevik Revolution. That's something we don't quite get. We all are here fighting over right, left, etc., while there's this architecture up top that is controlling everything.
Yeah, that's the biggest red pill to swallow of all, because we like to choose up sides, and we certainly don't like to think that our choices are not choices at all. But as you made that wonderful analogy to wrestling matches. I remember my grandmother, when we first had television, at least once a week, she'd be watching the professional wrestling in the afternoon. She'd get all excited. She'd look out behind you. You know, there was usually some guy. There was some guy that was dressed with the American flag, on his cape or something, and the other guy was all unshaven and snarly and a swastika on his arm, tattoos. He was ugly. Oh, who are you going to cheer for? My grandmother was really with the patriotic guy. And that Nazi, she hated him. And what she didn't realize, and what I didn't realize at the time, was that these guys probably worked for the same manager, same corporation, and they were hired on the basis of them being able to put on a pretty convincing fight. The fight has to look good, or the people don't come and sit and watch it. And you transfer that analogy to politics, you've got a perfect analogy of what goes on between the left and the right, and between the good guys and the bad guys. No matter which side you're on, that's what's going on. They're both controlled by the same wrestling managers.
Yes. Well, and you look at just below the global bankers. You've got Henry Kissinger and George Soros working the left and the right. And just basically conducting this whole scam. And we've had guests on here. We just had a financial guy on not that long ago where he witnessed D'Amato and I forget the Irishman's last
Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Yeah, Moynihan and D'Amato, where they were Democrat and Republican. And in the press, they hated each other. They were both criminals. They accused each other of all kinds of high crimes and treason. But they were actually very close friends. They golfed together. They gave graduation presents to each other's kids. They were very close friends, and that's what's going on in Washington D.C. Currently. I mean, most of those folks are absolutely very good friends because they're all criminals right now.
Well, yeah, it's a fact of life, and I think people understand it. That for a long time, the voters don't vote for a candidate. They vote against a candidate. They don't like any of them, but they usually say, well, this is the lesser of two evils. Now, I don't like him for this reason or reason, but that guy I hate. And so hatred is a very important part of the political scene. And we look at what's going on today. I don't think whoever it is your good guy is, whoever you think is the good guy in the scenario today, it's because you hate the other side or fear the other side. And believe me, if we didn't have that, if we didn't have all these nasties in the street throwing fire into buildings, burning buildings down, beating up people, looking so ugly like the wrestler I'm talking about, if we didn't have that, I can tell you the guy in the White House wouldn't look like anything. It's who's fighting against him makes him look good. And of course, if you're on the other side, they try and make the president look really bad and hateful, and the people who are on this side hate him so much. So this is the formula. And until you see that formula and get your own convictions, I mean, we've all come through the years thinking we had really good guys, and maybe there were a few along the way, but they were precious few. Precious few. I think I'm half joking when I say the last good president we had was Thomas Jefferson. I'm half joking. Sometimes Jackson, I wonder even about him.
wasn't it Jackson was the last one to kill the central bank before the Federal Reserve, correct?
Yes. And so you say, well, he's a good guy, right? Because he killed the central bank, and you have to salute him for that. But he's also the one that turned the presidency into an imperial office. Until that time, the president served the Senate. And then after that battle, the president was like the king, and it hasn't changed since then. People don't realize that historically the president was supposed to be just an executive who carried out the orders of the Congress and the Senate. And he wasn't elected by the people. He was elected by the Senate, and he was working for the people that we vote for. And the idea, they didn't want everybody to vote for the president because we didn't want him to be a king, be a popular king. We got rid of kings. Well, all the people that remembered the kings are dead by that time. And so they changed it. And Jackson had more to do with that than anything. So as I say, it's hard to find a really good guy from top to bottom when you go back and look at history.
Yeah. So now as we move forward into what we've seen,
and you look at things that are going.
Sorry, go ahead. Jeff, I was just going to say, the minute they imposed this lockdown for this pandemic, we call it, on America and on the world, the minute that happened, Jeffrey and I both said, this is not about a pandemic. This is about a financial collapse, because we had been following global banking stocks for quite some time and had been saying that the collapse was most likely going to happen in the spring of 2020, just watching a few global banking stocks that were absolutely tanking for a year and a half before this all went down. And so, you obviously sat back and watched this all happen and well aware of why this is going on. So they use this as, we've said, a camouflage jacket over a financial collapse so that politicians and global bankers don't get drug into the streets and hung.
Yeah, that's a very important analysis. I think it's certainly true. The pandemic, as you call it, I call it the pandemic theater. Has other purposes and advantages to these people as well. First of all, they condition people to be very subservient. There's an old saying: a drowning man is not interested in reading the Constitution. So when you get the population panicky over their survival, whether it's from terrorism or destruction of the environment, or a flu bug, or whatever it is, and they're convinced that life is at stake and their future, their children, their grandchildren, they don't care whether what you're talking about is constitutional or not. They want you to save their lives, you see. Right. And this is the other trick we have to keep our eye on. I'm convinced that most, if not all, of these fearful things that we've been conditioned to give up our liberties in order to avoid have been planned, and they are theater for that very reason. Yes. Not that there isn't some reality to it. I mean, look at the present reality. They're been trying for years to create real race war in America. They want to create it. Yes. And it looks like they're fueling the fire. And it's just in dread. There'll be some violence that takes place because there'll be some redneck who gets fed up with all this, and they'll go in, they'll perform some kind of a real atrocity against some black people. The black people will say, yeah, I guess there is racism, and then we'll have race war. That's what they really want, so they can finally bring in the soldiers, and we got martial law, and that's the end of the game.
Yes.
Because once we get that, it will not go away.
Well, and that's honestly, in my opinion, obviously through your analysis and others, that is kind of the end game. But kind of going back to something that's been plaguing a lot of us since 2016 is this notion. I'm not a Trump guy myself. I don't care who is or who isn't. But this notion, he's played it well that he's the good cop. And specifically recently, as it relates to the Federal Reserve, everyone, the word came out that Trump's now the head of the Federal Reserve, even though he's going through this intermediary, this company called BlackRock, which is just Wall Street up and down. His Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, is Skull and Bones. His dad was Goldman Sachs. Talk to us, if you don't mind, a little bit on how, this narrative of creating this narrative of this white hat and people kind of falling for it when nothing he seems to be doing. He got some symbolic stuff going on, but he makes Bernie Sanders look like Barry Goldwater with some of, we're never going to be a socialist country, but then he gives the banks and corporations trillions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then often I'll say, gee, I shouldn't have done that. I don't think I'm going to do that again. It slays me how people will fall for the same trick over and over again. I think I'm not a tennis player, but I understand that a tennis player that really has a good serve is really king. And if you're up against a professional tennis player that has a good serve, you better figure out what his serve is and practice returning it, So I look at the politics and I think they use the same serve on us year after year after year.
Yes.
And it's always the same curveball,
That's why
and
it's
yet we
so
say, oh, look at that.
Yeah,
And so the serve here is that they always say the right things during the campaign. I mean, they say, look, they spend a lot of time and money with polls to find out what it is the American people want to hear. Yes. Why do they do that? Because then they can have their speechwriters say, help me say what the American people want to hear. They don't care what they want to hear. They just have to tell them that so they can get elected. After they're elected, it's all over. So you look back over the years and you see all the presidents starting, well, maybe before this, but certainly remember FDR. I've seen some of his newsreels where he's saying, I hate war. Eleanor hates war. What was the dog? Anyway, I've forgotten the dog's name. Little Scotty, he hates war. He said, I promise you, when I'm elected, our boys will not get into war. Well, at the very time he was giving that speech, he was working out plans to get us into war so we can be involved in international affairs and begin to create this global government that he thought, and all the others of the same ilk, thought was a great idea. So they lie about war. And then, of course, how many presidents do we have in our memory? They've all campaigned on putting an end to the war. Every one of them. I don't care whether Republicans or Democrats, but which one has actually done that? They've all done just the opposite. After they go in, there's more budget for war. There are more troops overseas. There's more aggressive action and so forth. So it's the same serve over and over again.
And over.
Why don't we see it?
That's what frustrates the heck out of me. Why don't we see it? It's been played out. Go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry.
Twist. We've got, unfortunately, where we've also switched over to the proxy armies and all of that for many years now. But now we see proxy armies being funded in our own country. The people that are doing this are being funded, by the George Soros Open Society Foundation and other groups that are paying these people to do this stuff. These organizers to bring, and organize all these lemmings into this crazy, these riots and stuff. And you see, Antifa hijacking the Black Lives Matter movement, when you go to that site to donate money and then you track it, Live Blue or Blue, I forget the name of it, but you go to that and where their expenditures are on that part, it goes to Bernie Sanders, it goes to all these different politicians when you donate to Black Lives Matter. And it's just, it's pure insanity that Americans aren't seeing this. And here's a really important thing that I want to say that I think might be an important thing to bring up to everyone, not just blacks around this country, any minority, and even the white majority in this country, that we need to ask the question is, why are there so few black-owned banks in America? And once you can get them to talk about that, once you get them thinking about that, and Latinos and other Americans, why are we not part of this? Why can't I be part of that group? Why can't I own a bank? Why can't I get my friends together and open a bank? Then once they start questioning that, then they're ready mentally to absorb the fact that the global bankers are the ones that are causing the true oppression and funding what's happening around this country.
Well, and before you answer, sir, this goes back to kind of what we were talking about of these international banking conglomerates funding, whether it's the Bolshevik Revolution, Hitler, Mao, to create this seemingly controlled opposition. And this goes to something you mentioned before in some of your analysis: pressure from above and pressure from below, which creates what we're kind of seeing now. It's that Hegelian dialectic of creating the chaos, bringing the solution to the chaos that you provided, while people in the middle, Black Lives Matter, even though some of the things we've seen is absolutely egregious, but they don't realize they're being utilized and being exploited. You go back to the Bolshevik Revolution, all these people who thought they were doing part of this next evolution, when they were done with them, they were done with them. And what we're going to talk here about Yuri Bezmenov and that conversation, the 4 stages of ideological subversion. But go ahead, sir.
Well, yeah, you've said it so well. I'd like to promote something that I just put up on the internet a few days ago. Let me give you a little background on that. I'm sorry, I have to always rewind a little bit before I can answer your question. About a week ago, I got a phone call from somebody who said, yeah, Mr. G, we just saw one of your old videos is going viral on the internet. I said, oh, really? Which one? And they said, well, it has something to do with communist revolution. What? Oh, I remember that one. It was probably called More Deadly Than War, the communist revolution in America. Yeah, that was it. So I said, that's making the rounds? Yeah. So I looked, and sure enough, somebody had taken one of our VHS copies that we made years and years ago, and they'd made a really bad transfer of it. It was really hard to look at, but this is what was going around. I said, oh my gosh, and I'd forgotten about it. I looked at it, at the video, I watched the whole thing through. I thought, oh yeah, I've forgotten all about that. I did a lot of research on it. This is exactly what's going on today. It's the implementation. So I found my 1-inch master tape. I took it into Hollywood a few days ago. I had them remaster it. It's all pristine. I put it up on the internet, and now there's a good quality up there. And the reason I mention it is because I would like to urge all of your listeners to go to redpilluniversity.org. And that'll be very high to the top. We're putting new videos in all the time, but very close to the top. Look for it. It's called Communist Revolution in America, More Deadly Than War. I switched the titles around a little bit. And the reason I mention it is because that's where, among other things, I talk about that pincers movement, pressure from above and pressure from below. They have their agents in government and their agents in mass action organizations. They put the organizations into the street, and they have violence and a lot of firebombing and threats, and it scares the dickens out of everybody. They don't realize that, a couple of thousand people looks like a lot, could be 5,000, but that's all. They're all there. They get bussed in, most of them. The organizers, at least, are all bussed in, and as you pointed out, they're on the payroll. It wouldn't happen without this organizational force behind it. So they get these people demanding something, and then their agents in government say, well, we just have to do what the people want, and they start proposing legislation, and then everybody in the middle, which is 99% of the population, says, oh my gosh, I guess we're surrounded. I thought, I must be crazy. Look, everybody wants this. The people in the street, the politicians up above, and so they are passive. They say, well, I guess we have to do it because the majority wants it. And that's just one of the strategies that's in that video. And the rest is what you're talking about, is that these people that are being used, it's been carefully strategized. Every nation is examined to see what is the weak point. What division can you find within a nation if you want to take it over? And divide those people against each other. In America, the best thing they came up with was race. In other countries, they find religion. In other countries, they find ethnic origins or something, but whatever it is, they analyze it, and then that's the wedge they try and drive into people so that they can create the semblance of civil war on that issue. And boy, there it was laid out, and I've quoted all the communist literature, the training manuals and everything else that explain that. Once people see that and realize that this was strategized, and I did that video in, are you ready for this? 1969.
Oh,
1969.
Wow.
So it was all done. Of course, I'm drawing from documents that go back to 1930 and 1929. These communist documents from around the world that lay out this strategy. And once you see it and you look at what's happening in America today, you think, oh my God, I see it all. Carefully.
Even if you go on, prepping for this, I went on and, I kind of was somewhat aware of it, but the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, you did see the telltale signs of the same things we're going through right now. Almost like Yuri said, none of these protests, nothing is ever organic. But like you said, it's in particular reasons they'll use race, but in the Bolshevik revolutions, they just use people who were just out of money, out of food, just basically.
Well, it was class.
Exploiting
it was class.
Yes,
the class warfare.
Yeah. Yes, just exploiting the feelings of the disenfranchised, and police and military were turning on the Romanovs and creating this conglomerate or creating this force that the Bolsheviks just kind of rolled into. But again, people just didn't know that this was being fomented and funded from outside. And you look at what's going on now, and I know we don't have you for too much longer, so I really wanted to ask you about Yuri Bezmenov, because you look at that interview, and I implore everyone to go look at and watch that full interview. It's beyond mind-blowing, because you're almost watching somebody. He could literally be talking like it's 2020 right now. And the four stages he spoke about ideological subversion, demoralization, destabilization, crisis, normalization. I mean, we could see all of that happening right now in your analysis, seeing, I mean, because you were even saying in that conversation with him, and even in the capitalist conspiracy, like the time is running out, and this was in the 80s. Where do you see in this 4-stage attack where we are right now? I mean, yeah, what are your thoughts? Where are we at in this 4 stages?
Well, I think that's pretty easy, and it's not much controversy about it if you're really objective and see what's happening, and you know what the formula is. You can say, oh yeah, we're at least at the midpoint of the crisis, at the midpoint, at least the midpoint, maybe past the midpoint a little bit.
When he was saying, I don't mean to interrupt you with the demoralization, he was saying it takes almost 10 to 15 years just to demoralize a nation, and to return and to reverse that is another 10 to 15 years. So I mean, again, getting people to realize it's chess, not checkers. And this is we had Rosa Corian talking about the UN and Agenda 21. This is something they've been planning for decades. Yeah, this is a long-term strategy, and it was hard for me as a young guy to accept the fact that the solution has to be long-term. I remember when I first caught fire on this, I would talk to the old guys in the movement, and they'd say, well, don't be in a rush. You can't turn this over by the next election. Well, I wanted it done by the next election, I'll tell you that. But now that I understand more and I understand what you're talking about, they have been taking the slow march through the culture and through the educational system and through the religions. I mean, it's a cultural thing. And people's ideas have to be slowly changed back. It cannot happen by the next election. Once you get that idea in your head, then you sort of, it mellows you a little bit. You realize, well, okay, I might not even see a return to what I would like to see in my lifetime, but I'm doing my part now. And I'm going to bed with a smile on my face because I'm laying the foundation of what will be a generational reform. Yes.
Right.
Well, and as we look at, I'm sorry,
your knowledge passed on to me has been passed on, to my children. My children are conservative, and their classmates, because of what they've seen, the millennial generation, many of them imploding with their safe spaces and all this craziness that has been programmed into them. The generation of kids that are in high school now and some of the kids that are in college now are going in there with total different mindsets because of what they've witnessed and what they've seen, and because of parenting of people who have read a little bit and researched a little bit. And so that's a good sign. You should feel very good about that. Also, my kids and their classmates have debated their teachers nonstop. Their teachers are very liberal, of course, and on one occasion, one of my daughters and her classmates were debating with one of the teachers. The teacher broke down and had to leave the room. They destroyed the teacher so badly in the debate.
Oh my gosh, that's unusual, isn't it?
Right.
Well, I hate to see anybody break down and be destroyed. I'd like to see this be an intellectual awakening rather than a confrontation and destruction.
Well, but the teachers think they have the upper hand on the kids, and they bully them. They bully them into this indoctrination, and the kids are fighting back now. The kids are going, we're not taking this from you, and that's a great thing.
That's very encouraging. Yeah.
Well, and as we see the cities on fire, we got Chaz going on. 8 square blocks taken over in Seattle. Again, if you got a lot of these young kids being weaponized, as we've discussed here, and as I see this playing out, and especially listening to your analysis and just all of this from the, policemen are being fired. We're talking about defunding. A lot of them are resigning. And for me, it's like, okay, do you guys think once you get rid of the police, the crime is gone? This is 2020. You have career criminals going on right now. And it literally, sir, I mean, I don't want military on the streets. My co-host, my brother Pat, we don't want military on the streets, but it baits this question of like, if these governors, if these mayors aren't willing to do this again follows the same playbook that these gentlemen, they create the chaos. And if no one does anything about it, then what are we looking at? We're looking at national, federal, possibly UN troops on the ground to create this police state and martial law that they wanted to create in the first place. Again, it's just like we're just falling for it, and we're just not aware of the chess game taking place.
Well, when you say we're falling for it, the public has no knowledge of what's going on. They're just witnessing it. But the mayors and the governors are not falling for it. They're creating it. You see, It's important for us to realize that the reason there is no action is because they want it to get worse.
Sure.
They want
When I
the
was going to ask you
excuse.
about possible federal funding, how that's like the blackmail tool of federal funding to help influence or letting this stuff go, because it's
They're
unprecedented.
letting it go because they want it to scare the heck out of everybody to the point where they'll say, oh, bring in martial law. Oh, thank you for doing that. So they want us to beg for the very thing that they've got planned. And this is how they do it.
Yeah.
The
And
Hegelian
I have to
dialectic.
add something on getting rid
Yes,
of the
sir.
police force. The public needs to know that in every communist revolution, whether starting with the Soviet Union and all of the satellite countries around the Soviet Union and that advance of communism that went through Eastern Europe, in every country during the initial stages of takeover, the police were disbanded.
Sure.
Okay. What happened next? A new police force was created, usually called the Citizens Committee for Peace or Security. The Citizens Committee, all right? Who were the citizens? All the criminals that were let out of the prison were given a rifle and a badge. All the psychopaths, all the murderers, all the most vicious people they could find, they put them into the Citizens Committee, led by the revolutionaries, and they went through the neighborhoods, and it was a bloodbath. They had names and addresses. Everybody who opposed the system got slaughtered in their homes by the Citizens Committees. This is what happened. And when the Citizens Committees were done with that, it was sort of a mop-up operation. Then they were eliminated, of course.
Yes.
Yes.
Now we went to normalcy. Normal.
Yeah. See, and that's what that again, man. These young kids who are, I mean, pardon my language, full of piss and vinegar out here, thinking they're Ralphie Wiggum from The Simpsons, and they're out here helping and being part of the solution, having no idea they're being played, none whatsoever. Because even Yuri Bezmenov is like, look, when they're done with you, and I don't know if that's what's going to happen here, they're going to line you up against the wall and they're going to shoot your ass. You know, when they are done, it's just a means to an end type relationship, and people don't realize they think they're part of the tip of the sword of this revolution, but literally they're just being exploited and being played.
And you can't tell them that, though, because I've told them for years that you're serving a purpose right now, but once your purpose is done, you're as disposable as I am, who opposed it in the first place.
Yeah, well, the leaders of this movement refer to those people in the street as useful idiots.
Yes.
That's the word they use for it. Useful idiots. It's not our word, it's their word.
Right.
They laugh about it.
Yeah.
Wow. So much going on. I mean, this is the real 6D chess or whatever people say. I mean, and it's scary, sir. Like literally over the last couple of days, I literally, just because I'm a history guy, but I've been watching stuff from the Bolshevik Revolution and even the old documentaries, and they're using the same language. Yeah, they release prisoners from the prisons, and I mean, and that's what we're doing here today. And then hearing the larger, and that's what's so scary, ladies and gentlemen. Just open a history book. This is not a puzzle. Like you were saying earlier, just go to some microfilm. This is hidden in plain sight. You just have to want to look for it. Everyone's looking for these shortcuts to thinking and these fast food ways of getting their news. It's deep, man. This unpackaging this stuff is very deep, but it without a doubt makes you understand what's going on now. And I just the stakes are so freaking high right now. And you know, you have Seattle being taken over by these freaking morons. And what's the next shoe to drop? Another city? How long is this going to go until it's stopped? But then it's like, what's going to stop it? This national police force that nobody wants, the UN or whatever it is. If you don't mind, prognosticate. I know we have a couple minutes with you. What do you see? What do you see coming from this? As someone who's prognosticated this almost through your research, just from understanding history, where do you see us going in the next 6 months, 12 months? Obviously, nothing's going to change within an election cycle, but where do you see us going? Are we beyond? Are we too far? Are we too far gone?
No, I don't think we're too far gone. If we were too far gone, I'd probably be booking a flight to Mars or something out of here, if I could get there. And I'm afraid of heights too. But no, I don't think it's too far gone. But I do think it's so serious that we're not going to get out of this without a serious price. I mean, there's going to be hell to pay. Yeah. But maybe this is part of the natural cycle of civilizations, that we're here not to prevent it, because I'm not sure we can prevent a lot of calamity now. I think it's gone too far. It's going to be really bad. But we're here to help rebuild. It's our job, I think, is to lay the foundation for the ideas and the history lessons so that the remnant that survives what's coming ahead will not make the same damn mistakes over again.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and this is, I think, our mission. I wish I could say, oh yeah, we'll just find somebody to run for president on the Libertarian Party or something. I don't know. And if we just get the right guy on the white horse, be good, but I know that that's not the answer. So I don't know. I'm not predicting what's going to happen because it could go one of two ways. It could go all the way into a system that's going to be so horrible I can't even imagine. I think in general, to make it seem the least objectionable, I would describe it this way. I think if we don't stop it, we're heading into a system where it'll be like being Elvis will be in the military. We'll be soldiers in the military. We won't have any privacy. We won't have any property. We won't have any money. You don't need money in the military. They give you your shelter, your food, your clothing, your weapons, and so forth, medical care, education. And if you have rank, then you get a house, a very nice house. You don't have to live in the barracks. And if you're an officer and you're especially a colonel or a general, well, you get a very nice house and a limousine. And if you're at the top of that, you've got people all around you, and you've got expense accounts. You don't have to have money. But the thing is, you have to obey. Once you start being a problem and you step out of line, you lose all of that, and you are in the brig, or you're lined up against the wall and removed. I think this is the kind of thing we're going toward, and I don't know if we'll all wear uniforms, but there'll probably be some way to visualize us at a distance and tell what rank you have. Are you a top? Are you a big leader? Are you wearing a big silk hat like they used to? Or are you just wearing the silk clothes with a nice blue tie or something, and you've got a bunch of Secret Service men going around listening to their little phones? You can spot people nowadays. They got, it's status. The kids, all the young people are being convinced that they have to dress down in order to be cool. They don't want to look like they're somebody important. So when somebody shows up in a suit and a tie or a tuxedo or something, it's like a uniform almost, you see. But I think we're heading toward that where it won't be uniforms, but probably be a stripe or star or something visible at a distance. You can say, oh, now there's a person I better be really nice to. Or you can recognize that guy over there, he better do what I tell him to do, because otherwise I'll get him in trouble. Unfortunately, I think that's where we're going, and that means that there's no room for individuality, no room for humanality. I mean, anything that's human, privacy, respect, dignity, none of that.
Human or individual, like you said, because the master stroke has been taking the groups and then playing them off against each other, and the individualism just falls to the wayside, victim of collectivism. And something we talk about all the time, man. We got this show. Hopefully, is creating awareness. You can't change a problem unless you release aware of what's going on. Whether it's what we're seeing is coming is Agenda 21, the Internet of Things, this technocracy that the eugenicists have planned for almost 100 years. We have to start waking up. I know a lot of people's hearts are in the right place, but again, this is a chess game, not checkers, and you can't be allowing yourself to get played to create a situation that's worse than the situation we're trying to get away from. Champ, we got to let our man slide here. Do you have any comment to that, sir?
Well, I just have one closing comment I think is important when you get into these grim futuristic pictures, is that we have to remember that history has always been written by a few. We don't need everybody. It'll never happen. I mean, most people will never take enough interest to do anything about it. Sure. And that's very discouraging. You think, oh my gosh, we lose because we can't reach everybody. But no, history has always been written by 1% or less of the population. They're the thought leaders. They're the leaders of any revolution. They're the people that make things happen. 1%, and the rest will follow. Now, around that 1%, there's maybe a 15% who are looking for a leader, but they are activists, and they will do the work. If you look at the American Revolution, for example, who led the American Revolution? If you make a list of the names, who signed the Constitution, who signed the Declaration of Independence, who wrote the pamphlets, you'll come up with probably about 100 names, 100 people, no more than that. Maybe 150 people created the American Revolution. But now they needed 15% of patriots around them say, yeah, that's great, count me in, I will help. And now you had 15%, and the other 65% said, gee, I wonder which side is going to win. And whichever side won, I was always on that side, they'll say. So this is the way it goes. So we don't have to be too pessimistic, the fact that our neighbor pushing the lawnmower doesn't understand. Of course, most of them won't. We're looking for that 15%, and then within that, the 1% who will really dedicate their lives, and we can make that happen with 1% or less of the population.
We're doing our best to be
I
the
like
one
that
percenters.
Yes.
Yeah,
I like that
you are
energy.
Yeah.
Sir,
Let's use that as a
shout out
slogan.
any
We are
social
the
networking.
1%. All right.
I love it. I love it. Because that's true. That's so very true, man. We're not gonna, you're not gonna save them all, but with that small bit that we do have, we can do a lot of work. So if you don't mind, before you slide, shout out any social networking where we can find you, websites, track you down, see what you're up to.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'd like anybody who wants to get involved in some of these strategies that I'm talking about. The place to start is redpilluniversity.org. That's where we have all the information, and you have to understand when you get there that that's the beginning. Now, if that crusader gene starts to vibrate, if you have one of those, you're going to want to do more than just look at videos. That's not why we're there. We're there to get the information vetted and out, but then the next step is to make things happen. And what we are trying to do is create campuses of Red Pill University in every county in the United States and around the world, in similar geographical subdivisions, because we have to build this movement from the ground up. So be aware that that's really where we're going with this movement. And then, of course, that 1% can go into Freedom Force and dedicate their lives to this thing. We're trying to build a counterforce to the forces we're up against are organized with circles within rings within rings. It's a classical strategy of organization. And the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States pretty much runs the United States. There's about 4,400 people run the United States. That's a very small group. If we had 4,000 people, really, of course, we'd also have to have the power and the connections that they have. They're running all the corporations. They have control of the government agencies and the press and the media and the schools.
Right.
That makes a big difference. We don't want to forget that.
Yeah, can't overlook
and also, they make the money.
Yeah,
they make the bloody stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
But the point is, if we had a controlled center like that, we could. We have one thing that our enemy does not have, and that's loyalty to principle. They have to buy their loyalty, and they have the money to do it. They can get loyalty with money and fear and blackmail, whereas we don't need any of that. All we need is people who want to dedicate their lives to liberty.
Yep.
They wish they had that power. We have.
And it comes down again to looking into your children's eyes, and are we willing to let them enter into the level of slavery that we're talking about, that these people are planning for our children? I, for one, am not. I will not stand idly by and allow this to happen without at least doing my utmost to try and stop it.
Second that motion.
Well, we're
sir,
all in the same brotherhood on that one.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I can't thank you enough for your time, sir. This has been absolutely an awesome conversation. And if you don't mind, would love to have you back as things kind of pan out, and we'll see where we are in a few months and see if some of our, not necessarily predictions, but see if some of our analysis was legit, and we'll just, kind of see where we are. Because I don't mean to be fatalistic about it. I always try to find the silver lining, because I think all of us are kind of learning more about ourselves, learning more about the government, and how things can just be taken away immediately. But I just see a lot of, as we're all seeing, things, whether it's police shootings or people taking over cities. I just see it being a part of this narrative, create the chaos, and then bringing to solutions to the chaos you created. Not you, obviously, but that the powers that be created. So we'll keep our eye open and keep up the good fight. Patrick, of course, always love you, my friend. Mr. G. Edward Griffin, thank you so very much. Peace and love, and I wish you absolutely all the best, and hopefully look forward to speaking to you sometime soon down the line. Okay, count me in. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. G. Edward Griffin, ladies and gentlemen. TheConspiracyFarm.com. Support the sponsors, support the farm. Peace and so much love. Thank you. And, of course, there'll always be more.